Well, winter is upon us, but we're about to talk about the birds and the bees. That's right, the big sex talk. It is a rite of passage and the stuff that TV sitcoms are made of. But when you take into account that by high school graduation, 60% of students say they are sexually active, and a third of them did not use a condom the last time they had sex, it's definitely not a laughing matter.
Intro 952, as it's known in the New York City Council, would require the New York City Department of Education to report information regarding school compliance with state regulations about health and HIV/AIDS education for 6th through 12th grade students. Councilmember Laurie Cumbo, chair of the Committee on Women's Issues, is the lead sponsor of that bill and two others that would bring a revitalized sex ed curriculum to New York City public schools. And she's here now to tell us about the plan. Welcome back to BK Live, Councilmember Cumbo.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be back. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, it's such a pressing issue, and New York City
Certainly.
Public Schools is such a large entity. Could you explain to us why this bill isn't, a carte blanche, green light for students to go have sex?
We had a hearing on this issue about 3 weeks ago, and it was incredible to hear so many young people come forward to say they just wish that they had enough information to make educated decisions. So many young people who have decided to engage in sex in the early part of their lives often regret it afterwards. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to put forward a bill that would give us an opportunity to have reporting on sex education. Chancellor Walcott, during his tenure, to his credit, was able to mandate that one semester of sex ed be done in middle school and another semester in high school. Unfortunately, while this is also a state mandate, it hasn't been implemented throughout New York City public schools. So we have a state mandate, but we have no idea if it's being implemented in our schools, and we are seeing the ramifications of that with the rise in STDs as well as HIV. Over 50% of the cases of HIV that are happening in New York City are happening with individuals under the age of 25. And so we have to understand that these statistics are real. And while we're spending a great deal of time talking about test performance and how students are weighing in academically, we need to make sure that we are providing them with enough information to make situations and decisions on their own sexual health so that we can empower them to make the best decisions for themselves right now and in the long-term future.
So to that end, this bill is sort of a two-headed monster. There's a legislative end that makes sure that reporting is happening and people
Correct.
are being held accountable for the standards we already have.
That's right.
But at the same time, you're taking that reach even further with the things that students are going to be learning, from literally physical health to things about relationships and dealing with grown people issues.
That's right. If we, as you said, if a majority of young people in our high school have already had sexual intercourse and are already in that zone, we have to make sure that we provide them with the proper information. And one of the things that we're seeing when we had that hearing is that no one could give us a straight answer as to how the sexual education curriculum is being implemented, as well as an additional component on HIV and AIDS awareness. Young people simply are not getting the information. And what we see is that while this is such an uncomfortable topic and people often don't want to talk about sex education, our children are making very real decisions. So for example, every year in New York City, we have 17,000 unintended teen pregnancies. And as chair of the Women's Issues Committee, we're not saying that because young women and men are having children at that teen age, that those children cannot go off to accomplish great things. But what we are saying is that in New York City, in your middle school and high school age, when you don't have all of the information and the resources, having a child unintended is a huge burden on a young person as well as their family. When we're looking at the escalating cost of living in New York City, having the responsibility of bringing a child into the earth and providing them with all of the resources that they need creates a great challenge and a burden on a young person when they could be utilizing that time to further their academic career.
I have to ask you, to put it into a sort of perspective for me. When was the last time that New York City Public Schools, updated or had a comprehensive sex education plan?
There is a sex education curriculum, and that is in place. We'd also like to see some changes to that because What we don't want to have is that we don't want to have something that's just talking about sex. We want to talk about healthy relationships, because domestic violence is also an issue that young people are experiencing in terms of teen dating violence. We want to make sure that we talk about that. So many young people are experiencing violence at home and think that that's also a normal part of a relationship, and we want to get to the heart of that as well. And some young people are also dealing with a lot of issues in terms of being molested at a young age and not understanding the difference between what is an improper and proper way to navigate relationships with adults. So we want to make sure that we put all of these issues forward, as well as our LGBTQ community, who, as you know, in our New York City public school systems, experience serious levels of bullyism that's happening in their schools that often goes unaddressed, or sometimes they're just relocated to another school where they think that professionals can better handle some of the challenges, instead of educating young people that we all come in all different shapes, sizes, forms. We all have different ways that we love and who we love. And so it's so important that we educate our young people about these critical issues.
Well, you know, we love having elected officials come and share their perspective, but we like to mix it up. We often invite people who are like on seemingly opposing sides of arguments to talk about something. Try as we may, we could not find credible people to come here and say, you know what, abstinence only, like has been tried in some other jurisdictions, or say, you know, this is an at-home issue. I feel like I need to keep sex around my kitchen table. I want my kids to test and learn that reading and writing. So has there been any pushback where people saying, maybe you're going too far with the gay thing. We don't need you to talk about domestic violence or being gay with my kids. I just want them to learn health.
Reading, writing,
Yeah.
I think that the information is clear. I'm very proud on my bill that I have over 34 sponsors at this time out of the 51 members. I'm very pleased that the council has come on board in a great way. We're also looking to create a task force to make sure that these rules are implemented. The other thing that we want to see is that while some schools may think that they are adhering to the guidelines, what they might consider that is the physical ed teacher maybe taking a couple of hours out of class one day.
We had that in sophomore year. Miss Kelly was pointing at charts. And,
for a day.
Yeah.
For a day, and that constitutes
Done.
your gym teacher telling you a little bit about sex education,
Yeah.
quote unquote, the birds and the bees. That's not adequate. Our young people need to understand the infrastructure, how our body parts work. I was very pleased that our speaker, to her credit, came out very publicly about her HPV designation, and she was really very open and honest about it in a way that I had never really seen an elected official, because so often we want to push STDs and conversations like that as that's something that happens to other people. You could get 1,000 people in a room and have someone raise their hand to say that they've had an STD. You'll get no one to raise their hand. But yet, when you look at the facts and figures and statistics, you know, they're saying 1 out of every 4, 1 out of every 3, 1 out of every 6, but you get 1,000 people in a room, no one's had an STD. So it's really very critical, and Councilmember Corey Johnson has also been instrumental, and Councilmember Vanessa Gibson, because what we also want to see through this legislation, this package of bills, is that the people that are teaching sex education are also qualified, that they've received the proper training, and that they have a great understanding of the information that they're teaching and how to speak sensitively about this information. So this bill is going to give us a lot of transparency in that way that we normally did not have. We want to know by school which school is implementing these programs, which ones are not, and what are the results of that. Because unintended pregnancies have a cost to the city, STDs have a cost to the city, HIV, in terms of the medications and all of the things that many young people that are uninsured also has a cost. We need to understand, if we invest in this and we invest in our young people at an early age, can we help their physical ability to lead healthy lives for the long term? And that's really what this is about. We've got to cut through it, as Salt and Pepper said. Let's talk about sex, baby.
But 1 million moms isn't blowing up your inbox. There aren't people who are saying, enough, like you can't talk to kids about sex and gays and HIV.
I think the statistics are too real. I think that my generation that's having children, I think we remember that, you know, growing up, we had to get a lot of the information about sex from friends. And this generation is getting it off the internet,
Yeah.
with over 92% of young boys in their high school years having experienced some level of pornography on the internet.
Only 92?
Only 92%.
They must
And
have different cell phones.
others
Right,
are lying.
right. And then if we look at dating,
Yeah.
the average age of a young boy and a young girl dating now is 12 and a half years old.
Yeah.
So some very adult things are happening, and I think parents have recognized this may be a bit out of my reach to be able to reach my child in the way that I would like. But I want to say that implementing sex education in our schools should not be seen as a gateway or a rites of passage or an encouragement of young people to then go and act and have sex.
Yeah.
What we find is that when young people have all of the information needed and they have safe people that they can go to speak about it, it often deters young people from having sex at an early age and then having the ramifications of an unwanted pregnancy or an STD and ultimately HIV or AIDS status.
Well, I'm so sorry. When people, I'm just thinking of when you guys opened this up for public comment, because I saw the hearing on the 27th where people came and some phenomenal people supporting. But when this is open for public comment, someone is going to come into the chambers, get behind that mic and say, we teach kids driver's ed so they can get into a car and know how to drive. We're teaching kids sex ed so they can get into a bed and know how to ...
You know what? We had a forum. No one came forward that had that shared point of view. I want to say that what we're looking at is really ultimately a human rights issue. By denying young people all of the information that they need to make the most educated decision, we are setting them up for failure. This is a violation of their human rights. As adults, we have a responsibility to give them all of the information needed to make the best decisions possible. And we have to provide that structure. We have to make sure that they're getting the information. And we ultimately have to make sure that we create a next generation who's more free to talk about sex. Sex has to be discussed at the home. It has to be discussed in our churches, in our mosques, in our synagogues. It has to be spoken about in our social organizations. We have to break the uncomfortableness because this uncomfortableness is leading us into a pathway where so many young people are having their lives impacted in their formative years, where we could get ahead of that so that they could lead healthy lives.
Not that. Is this only in the classroom, or is this comprehensive? Also involves like guidance counselors, school health officials. So, where are all the different places where students can get this information?
I believe one of the things that we saw out of the hearing that was very successful is that some high schools have health clinics. And at these health clinics are spaces where they can go for testing, they can understand their status in terms of STDs, they can go for condoms, they have the ability to have trained professionals who can speak to them. But what we don't know is how successful these programs are, because there are also schools that are smaller, other schools that are also co-located with other schools that don't have these sorts of health clinics in their dynamics in terms of their building. So what we have to find out are where these health clinics located? What are the dynamics in terms of our unwanted pregnancies at an all-time low where there is a health clinic? Are STDs and HIV at an all-time low? We have to find that out, because if we find that out and we understand its impact, then we understand how much we need to invest to make sure that every school ultimately has this. I think in the hearing that came out, it was estimated that there are about 160 trained professionals teaching sex education in our schools that are trained and qualified and have all the proper certifications. But there are hundreds more who are teaching that don't have that certification. So it's important that through this legislation we make sure that that happens.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we'll end this segment. Thank you so much for coming to join us again. And
Enlightening.
Yeah. I have to say that when I was in middle school, my mother was a middle school science teacher, so she was my sex education teacher.
Oh, wow.
There's all the information. There's a lot of stories there. But having that information in an open, honest environment makes all the difference for the rest of your life. So
that's so true.
It's so important.
Well, we'll keep watching the
Thank you.
progress of that bill.